They tell you the tanks are sacred. They tell you the machine spirits inside them are ancient and venerable, worthy of your prayers and your incense and your careful ministrations with blessed oils. What they do not tell you is that some of those spirits are hungry. Some of them remember every soul that ever sat in their iron bellies, and some of them refuse to let those souls go. My name is Marcus Reeves, and I have commanded the tank they call Old Fury for 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days. I know the count precisely because I mark it each morning on the interior hull plating, scratching another line into the metal with a combat knife that belonged to the man who commanded her before me. His name was Harlan Webb, and they found him dead inside the turret with no wounds on his body and an expression of perfect peace on his face. The medicae said his heart simply stopped. The tech adept said the machine spirit had found him worthy and released him from his burdens. I have come to understand that both explanations were lies, and the truth is something far worse. I sleep beside her every night, my bedroll pressed against her track housings, my head resting against the cold metal of her hull. The other commanders in the regiment think me mad. They sleep in their tents, in their bunkers, in whatever shelter the campaign provides. They put distance between themselves and their vehicles when the fighting stops. I cannot. I tried in those first weeks after I took command. I would walk away from her at nightfall, find a corner of whatever ruin we had captured and close my eyes. But sleep would not come. My heart would race. My skin would crawl with the sensation of being watched, being judged, being found wanting. And always, I would hear her engine. Even when she was cold and silent, I would hear it. A low rumble at the edge of perception, like distant thunder or the breathing of some vast creature dreaming in the dark. The only peace I found was beside her. The moment I touched her hull, the racing stopped, the crawling ceased. The sound resolved into something almost like a lullaby, a mechanical purr that wrapped around my consciousness and pulled me down into dreamless black. I told myself it was simply the bond between a commander and his vehicle. I told myself every tank commander felt this way. I told myself many things in those early months, and I believed none of them. Old Fury is a standard pattern battle tank, 72 tons of sacred machinery wrapped in plates of ceramite and adamantine. Her main cannon is a battle cannon of the Mars configuration, capable of reducing fortifications to rubble and infantry to red mist. Her sponsons mount heavy bolters, her hull mounts a lascannon, and her armor has turned aside shots that would have cored lighter vehicles like fruit. She is beautiful in the way that only instruments of death can be beautiful, all hard angles and brutal purpose. The regiment calls her Old Fury because she has served for 400 years, passed down through generations of crews, and because her machine spirit is known to be temperamental, irascible, hungry for battle in a way that goes beyond the normal eagerness of blessed engines. What the regiment does not know is that she has had 47 commanders in those 400 years, 47 souls who sat in her turret and directed her wrath, 47 men and women who loved her, who feared her, who eventually died with their hands on her controls and their minds tangled in her systems. I know this because I have found their names. Scratched into hidden places inside her hull, carved into the underside of access panels, etched into the base of her turret ring where no one ever looks. Harlan Webb was the 46th. His name is scratched beside the ammunition rack, along with a date and 3 words that I did not understand until recently. She remembers everything. The campaign on Valdris 4 has lasted 18 months. We landed as part of the second wave, tasked with breaking through the heretic defensive lines and securing the primary water treatment facilities. What the strategists thought would take 3 months has stretched into an endless grind of trench warfare, armored assaults and desperate defenses. The heretics dug deep. They built bunkers of ferrocrete in spite. They seeded the approaches with mines and tank traps and killing fields that turned every advance into a bloodbath. Our regiment has lost 60% of its original strength. 4 of our 12 tanks have been destroyed outright. 2 more limp along with wounds that the tech adepts cannot fully heal. Old Fury alone remains unscathed. Her armor bears the scars of 100 impacts, but nothing has penetrated. Nothing has stopped her. The crew jokes that she is blessed. favored by the Emperor himself. They do not see what I see when I close my eyes at night. They do not hear what I hear when her engine runs hot in the fury of combat. Voices. The first time I heard them clearly was during the assault on Bunker Complex 7. We were 3 months into the campaign, pushing through a maze of trenches and pillboxes, and Old Fury was leading the spearhead. Enemy fire hammered against our hull, a constant percussion of impacts that should have deafened us but somehow seemed muffled, distant, as if the tank herself was absorbing the sound. I was directing fire, calling targets, trying to maintain situational awareness in the chaos of battle. And then, between one heartbeat and the next, I heard a voice that was not my crew. "Hold the line," it said. "Traverse 3 degrees left. They are hiding in the crater." I followed the instruction without thinking. I called the traverse. I ordered the gunner to fire. The shell landed precisely in the crater I had not consciously seen, and the heavy weapons team hiding there ceased to exist in a bloom of fire and fragmented earth. My crew cheered. They thought my eyes were simply sharper than theirs. They did not ask how I knew, they did not question, and I did not tell them that the voice had sounded like a woman, low and calm, with an accent I did not recognize from any world I had served on. That night, I searched the hull for the 47th name. I found it eventually, scratched into the base of the commander's cupola. Eleanor Vasquez, served 223 M41 to 229 at M41. I did the calculations. She had commanded Old Fury for 6 years, longer than most, longer than almost anyone on the list. And her name was followed by the same 3 words, "She remembers everything." I began to listen more carefully after that. In the quiet moments between battles, when the engine idled and the crew rested, and I pressed my palm against the inner hull, I could feel something like a heartbeat, not mechanical, not the rhythm of pistons and combustion, something older, something aware, and when I slept beside her I dreamed. The dreams were not my own. I knew this because I saw places I had never been, people I had never met, battles I had never fought. I saw the surface of a world covered in red sand, where Old Fury rolled through canyons of rust and iron. I saw the interior of a hive city, its lower levels flooded with toxic sludge, where Old Fury ground forward through streets too narrow for her bulk, her sponsons scraping against the walls. I saw a battlefield lit by the light of a dying sun, where Old Fury fired round after round into a tide of screaming heretics, while her commander, a man with grey hair and steady hands, whispered prayers into the vox that no one else could hear. I saw Harlan Webb die. It was not a heart attack, it was not a failure of biology, it was a choice. He had commanded Old Fury for 8 years, longer than almost anyone, and in those 8 years he had learned what I was only beginning to understand. The machine spirit was not simply an aspect of the tank, it was an amalgamation, a collective. 46 souls, maybe more, all wound. Together in the ancient systems, their consciousness bleeding into the metal and the circuits and the sacred oils that kept her running. And when a commander served long enough, loved her deeply enough, slept beside her and dreamed with her and let her into their mind, they did not die, they joined her. Harlan Webb sat in the turret on the night he passed and opened himself completely. He let her in, he let all of them in. And when his heart stopped, it was because he no longer needed it. His body became an empty vessel, and his soul became part of Old Fury forever. The expression of peace on his face was not the peace of death, it was the peace of completion, of finally belonging to something greater than himself. I woke from that dream screaming, and my crew found me beside the tank with my hands pressed against her hull and tears streaming down my face. I told them it was a nightmare, battle stress, the accumulated weight of 18 months of war. They believed me because they wanted to believe me, because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate. Their commander, the man who led them through the fire, was losing his mind to a ghost that lived inside their vehicle. I requested a transfer the next morning. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, the regiment's executive officer, no relation to Eleanor that I know of, called me into his command tent and listened to my carefully prepared justifications. I was burned out. I needed rotation to a training role. My skills would be better utilized preparing replacement crews. I had a dozen reasons, all of them plausible, none of them true. He listened, and then he shook his head. The paperwork, he said, got lost in transit. The replacement commander who was supposed to take over Old Fury died when his transport was hit by enemy artillery. The regiment was at critical strength and could not afford to lose experienced officers. There would be a review in 3 months. Until then, I was to continue my duties. I walked back to Old Fury and pressed my hand against her hull, and I swear I felt her engine rumble with something like satisfaction, even though she was cold and silent, even though no one had activated her systems, even though it was impossible. The heretic offensive came 2 weeks later. They had been building strength in the eastern sectors, massing their armor behind a ridgeline that our reconnaissance had somehow missed. When they attacked, it was with everything they had. 50 tanks at least, supported by infantry in the thousands and artillery that turned the sky into a ceiling of fire. Our defensive line buckled. 2 of our tanks were destroyed in the first minutes, caught in the open as they tried to reposition. The colonel ordered a fighting retreat, but the heretics were faster, more coordinated, more numerous. Old Fury saved us. I do not know how else to describe it. I was in the turret, trying to direct fire, trying to maintain some semblance of order in the chaos, and then I felt her. Not a voice this time, a presence, hands over my hands, eyes behind my eyes, 46 souls, maybe more, all lending me their experience, their knowledge, their accumulated centuries of war. I saw the battlefield the way Old Fury saw it, a map of trajectories and angles, of weak points and opportunities, of death waiting to be delivered. I called targets I could not have seen. I directed maneuvers I did not consciously plan. I fired the main cannon myself when the gunner was too slow, my hands moving without my permission, and every shot found its mark. We destroyed 11 enemy tanks. We broke the back of their assault. When the colonel asked me afterward how I had known, how I had performed feats of tactical brilliance that should have been impossible, I had no answer. I muttered something about instinct and training in the favor of the Emperor. He looked at me with eyes that held equal parts gratitude and suspicion, and he said nothing more. That night, I did not sleep beside Old Fury. I tried to stay away. I walked to the far end of our encampment and found a bombed-out chapel, its walls still standing but its roof open to the sky. I lay down on a pew that had been half burned by incendiary shells and closed my eyes and prayed for sleep that would bring me no dreams. The voices came anyway. They whispered in the dark around me, a chorus of dead commanders all speaking at once. They told me about the battles they had fought, the enemies they had destroyed, the moments of glory and the moments of horror. They told me about the bond that forms between a commander and a tank, a bond deeper than metal and oil, deeper than faith, deeper than anything I had ever known. And they told me about the choice that awaited me, the same choice every commander eventually faced, the same choice Harlan Webb had made. Join us, they said, become part of something eternal, never die, never be forgotten, never be alone. I fled the chapel at dawn, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I went back to Old Fury and pressed my forehead against her hull and begged her to let me go. The engine hummed beneath my skin, and I felt something like amusement ripple through our connection, like a mother tolerating a child's tantrum, like a predator watching its prey exhaust itself. She did not answer with words. She did not need to. We both knew the truth. I had been hers since the moment I first climbed into her turret, since the moment I first felt her engine rumble and her gun roar, since the moment I first dreamed her dreams. The only question was how long I would fight it. My gunner, Specialist Thomason, noticed the changes first. We had served together for 2 years, and he knew me better than anyone else in the crew. He saw how I flinched at sounds no one else could hear. He saw how I muttered responses to questions no one had asked. He saw how I slept beside the tank every night without fail, how I touched her hull constantly, how I had started to speak of her not as a vehicle but as a person. "Commander," he said one night, his voice careful and quiet, "you need to talk to the Medicae. Something is wrong. I looked at him, and for a moment I saw him through two sets of eyes. My own eyes, tired and bloodshot and filled with fear, and her eyes, assessing him, measuring him, judging whether he was a threat to our bond. The sensation was disorienting, terrifying, and somewhere deep inside, somewhere I was rapidly losing access to, I knew he was right. But I could not leave her. The thought of being separated from Old Fury filled me with a panic that bordered on madness. She was mine, I was hers. We had killed together, bled together, survived together. The crew were passengers. The regiment was background noise. Only she mattered, only she was real. I told Thomason to mind his duties and stop asking questions. The look he gave me was equal parts hurt and horror. He had seen commanders lose themselves before, ground down by the endless stress of armored warfare, broken by the weight of sending men to their deaths. But he had never seen anything like this. He had never watched a man become part of his own vehicle. The campaign reached its climax 3 weeks later. Intelligence finally located the heretic command bunker, buried deep beneath a mountain fortress in the northern ranges. The colonel ordered a full assault. Every surviving tank and infantry unit, a hammer blow meant to decapitate the enemy leadership and break their resistance once and for all. We rolled out at dawn, Old Fury in the vanguard as always, her engine howling with anticipation that I could feel in my bones. The approach to the fortress was a killing field. The heretics had spent 18 months preparing their defenses, and they fought with the desperation of true believers who knew that death was their only escape. Artillery screamed overhead. Anti-tank missiles streaked from hidden positions. The ground itself had been seeded with explosives that could flip a tank like a toy. I watched 2 of our vehicles die in the first kilometer, their hulls torn open, their crews immolated. I felt Old Fury's engines surge with something that might have been satisfaction. With every death, I understood, she grew stronger. Every soul claimed by the battle fed something ancient and hungry that lived in her metal heart. I directed fire with a precision that felt like possession. My hands moved without consulting my conscious mind. My voice called targets that I could not have identified on my own. Thomason stared at me from his gunner's seat, his face pale, his eyes wide, but he did not question. He simply obeyed. They all obeyed, and Old Fury roared forward through the fire and the death, unstoppable, inevitable, a 72-ton avatar of mechanized destruction. We breached the outer wall, we ground through the courtyard, sponson bolters chattering, main cannon belching death. We reached the gates of the fortress proper, adamantine slabs 3 meters thick, and I felt Old Fury's hunger spike to a fever pitch. She wanted what was inside. She needed it, and because I was hers, I needed it too. "Ram speed," I ordered. "Commander," Thomason said, his voice cracking. "That is suicide. The gates will destroy us." I turned to look at him, and I do not know what he saw in my eyes, but it made him flinch backward, made him press himself against the hull plating as if trying to escape. I smiled, and the smile did not feel like mine. It felt like 47 commanders all smiling at once, all sharing the same terrible anticipation. "She has never failed," I said. "She will not fail now." I ordered the driver to accelerate. Old Fury surged forward, her engine screaming, her tracks chewing the ferrocrete. The gates loomed ahead, vast and ancient and utterly impervious to conventional assault. I heard my crew praying. I heard the voices in my head joining them, but their prayer was different, older, directed not to the Emperor but to something that lived in the machine, something that had been accumulating power for 400 years. The impact should have killed us. Physics and engineering and simple common sense all agreed that we should have been crushed, crumpled, reduced to a twisted mass of metal and meat. But Old Fury hit those gates at full speed, and I felt something give. Not the gates, something inside her. Something that had been building since the first commander sat in her turret and offered his soul to the machine's spirit within. The gates shattered. Adamantine, blessed and warded and supposedly eternal, shattered like glass beneath our treads. We burst through into the fortress interior, and I heard cheering from my crew, heard disbelief in their voices, heard prayers of thanksgiving to a God who had nothing to do with what had just happened. The bunker complex was a maze of corridors and chambers, too narrow for Old Fury to navigate. I ordered the crew to dismount, to follow me on foot, to leave her idling at the breach point. Thomason looked at me with something approaching hope, as if he thought that separating me from the tank might break whatever hold she had on my mind. I let him believe it. I let them all believe it. But even as I walked away from her, I could feel her consciousness wrapped around mine like a second skin. Distance meant nothing. She was inside me now. Had been for months, perhaps years. We fought our way through the bunker on foot, lasruffles chattering, grenades clearing rooms. We found the heretic commander in his sanctum, surrounded by his bodyguard, screaming defiance even as we cut them down. I shot him myself, a clean last bolt through the forehead, and I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief. The kill was hollow because I had not made it from inside Old Fury. Because she could not share the experience with me, the campaign ended that day. Resistance collapsed without leadership. The remaining heretic forces surrendered or scattered. The colonel declared victory, and the regiment celebrated with whatever alcohol they had hoarded through 18 months of war. I sat beside Old Fury and listened to her engine idle, and felt the voices whispering their congratulations. "You did well," Eleanor Vasquez said. Her voice was clearest now, louder than the others. Perhaps because she had served longest, perhaps because she had loved Old Fury most deeply. "We are proud of you." "I do not want this," I whispered. "I do not want to lose myself." Silence from the voices. Then, softer, "You have already lost yourself, Marcus. The only question is whether you accept the gift or fight it until you break." The regiment was withdrawn from Valdres 4 2 months later. Shipped back to the sector capital for rest and refit, the colonel put me in for a commendation for the assault on the fortress. The administratum promoted me to full captain and offered me command of an entire armored company. I would have my own command tank. I would have junior officers to manage. I would have a future that did not involve Old Fury. I declined. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez called me into his office, his face a mask of barely controlled frustration. He did not understand. No one understood. I gave him a dozen reasons, all of them plausible, none of them true. The regimental staff thought I was simply eccentric, a commander who had bonded too deeply with his vehicle, who could not bear to leave her. They had seen it before in lesser forms. They did not realize what was actually happening. The nights grew worse, the dreams grew longer, more vivid, more immersive. I spent hours inside memories that were not mine, fighting battles on worlds I had never seen, killing enemies that had been dust for centuries. I began to lose track of which memories belonged to me and which belonged to the others. I would wake in the morning uncertain of my own name, uncertain of my own face, and only the feel of Old Fury's hull beneath my hands would anchor me to reality. Thomason requested a transfer. He said nothing to me directly, but I saw the paperwork on the lieutenant colonel's desk during a briefing. I could have blocked it. Officers have that power over their crews, but something in me, some remnant of the man I had been, understood that keeping him would be cruelty. He had seen too much, he knew too much, and if he stayed, he might become like me, might feel the first tentative touch of Old Fury's attention and find himself sliding down the same slope. I approved the transfer and watched him walk away without looking back. His replacement was a young woman named Specialist Harrington, fresh from training, eager and idealistic and utterly ignorant of what she was stepping into. I felt Old Fury's interest sharpen when she first climbed inside. "Fresh meat," the voices whispered. "Young and strong. She will serve well." I told them to leave her alone. I shouted it into the empty turret, my voice echoing off the metal walls, my hands pressed against controls that hummed with amusement. They did not answer. They did not need to. We both knew I had no power over what Old Fury chose to do. I was the commander. But she was the machine, and the machine's spirit had been accumulating power for 4 centuries. My authority was an illusion, a comfortable fiction that helped me maintain the pretense of control. The next campaign came 6 months after Valdres 4, a frontier world called Korath Prime, under assault by Xenos raiders. Standard deployment, standard objectives, standard brutality. Old fury rolled off the transport and onto the churned earth of another battlefield, and I felt her eagerness spike through our connection. War was her purpose, death was her sustenance, and she had been hungry for too long. We fought, we killed, we survived. The Xenos were fast and cunning, their war machines chitinous and organic and utterly different from the metal behemoths of Imperial design. But Old Fury was faster, Old Fury was deadlier, and I could feel her growing stronger. With every kill, every explosion, every soul that vanished in fire and smoke, Harrington noticed first. She asked me one night after a particularly brutal engagement why I talked to the tank, why I pressed my hands against her hull and whispered things she could not hear, why I slept beside her even when we had access to proper billets. I told her it was superstition, commander's prerogative, a bond between warrior and weapon. She did not believe me, I could see it in her eyes, but she was young and trained to obey, and she said nothing more. The dreams changed on Korath Prime. Instead of simply reliving memories, I began to see the future, or rather, Old Fury began to show me what she wanted the future to be. I saw myself decades older, still commanding her, still sleeping beside her, my body withered but my mind sharper than ever, because it was no longer entirely my own. I saw campaigns stretching across centuries, an endless parade of worlds and wars and enemies destroyed. I saw the moment when my heart finally stopped, when my body became an empty shell, when my consciousness joined the chorus inside the metal hull. And I saw what came after, the 48th Commander, the 49th, a line of souls stretching into eternity, each one adding their strength to the collective, each one becoming part of something greater than themselves. Old Fury would never die. Old Fury would fight until the stars burned out and the universe collapsed into silence, and I would be there for all of it, watching, fighting, serving. The revelation should have terrified me, should have sent me screaming to the Medicae, begging for any intervention that might sever the connection. But I lay beside her hull that night and felt the engine hum beneath my back, and what I felt was not terror. It was relief. I had spent my entire life searching for meaning, for purpose, for something that would outlast my fragile human existence. The Guard offered camaraderie and duty, but guardsmen died by the million and were forgotten before the smoke cleared. The Emperor offered salvation, but the Emperor was a distant god who never answered prayers. Old Fury offered eternity. Old Fury offered belonging. Old Fury offered a chance to matter. I stopped fighting. The change was immediate and obvious. My crew noticed. The Lieutenant Colonel noticed. Even the tech adepts who serviced Old Fury noticed, commenting with their mechanical voices that the machine spirit seemed unusually cooperative, unusually eager, unusually pleased. I smiled and said nothing. I commanded and killed and slept beside my tank, and the voices inside her welcomed me with warmth that I had never felt from any living person. 3 more years passed, 3 more campaigns, 3 more worlds saved or destroyed or abandoned to the enemy. My hair went grey, my face went gaunt, my eyes took on a distant quality that made subordinates uncomfortable and superiors suspicious. They thought I was burning out. They thought the war was consuming me. They did not realize that I had never been more alive. Harrington transferred eventually, like Thomason before her. She had seen too much, understood too little, and Old Fury had decided she was not suitable for recruitment. Not enough love, not enough surrender. Some souls could be taken, but others had to be given freely. Harrington was not capable of giving. Her replacement was a scarred veteran named Specialist Morrison, a man who had lost his previous vehicle to enemy fire and walked 300 kilometers through hostile territory to reach friendly lines. Old Fury liked him immediately. I could feel her attention sharpen when he climbed inside, could feel her testing his mind for the qualities she needed. Strong, loyal, desperate for belonging, perfect. I should have warned him, should have told him what was waiting inside the metal hull. But I did not, because Old Fury did not want me to. And by then I had stopped wanting things that she did not want. The final campaign began on a world called Thessaly 9, a hive world in the path of a greenskin invasion. The enemy came in numbers beyond counting, a green tide that swept across continents and drowned cities in blood. The regiment deployed as part of a massive counter-offensive, thousands of tanks and millions of infantry, a hammer blow meant to break the invasion before it could spread to neighboring systems. Old Fury roared into battle on the first day, and I felt her joy spike through our connection. This was what she had been made for. This was her purpose, her meaning, her reason for existence, and I shared it completely. Every kill was ecstasy, every explosion was prayer. Every soul claimed by our guns became part of her, became part of us, added their strength to the collective consciousness that wrapped around my mind like armor. We fought for 3 days without rest. The enemy came in waves, crude machines and howling warriors and creatures so massive that Old Fury had to target their joints to bring them down. My crew cycled through exhaustion and terror and euphoria, but I felt none of it. I was sustained by something beyond physical endurance, something that lived in the engine and the guns and the metal hull that had become my home. On the 4th day, we took a direct hit. The shell was massive, crude, something the greenskins had salvaged from an Imperial artillery piece and mounted on one of their monstrous walkers. It punched through our frontal armor like paper and detonated inside the crew compartment. I felt Specialist Morrison die, felt the driver die, felt the loader and the sponson gunners die, felt their souls tear free from their bodies and scatter into the void, and I felt Old Fury catch them. Not all of them, not immediately, but some part of each one, some fragment of consciousness was swept up by the machine spirit and pulled down into the collective. They were screaming, confused, terrified, unable to understand what was happening. But they were not lost. They were not gone. They were simply becoming part of something larger. I hung in my harness, blood streaming down my face, my body broken but my mind clearer than it had ever been. The voices were louder now. 46 commanders, maybe more, all speaking at once. And beneath them, newer voices, fresher voices, Morrison, the driver, the loader, the gunners, all of them adding their strength to Old Fury's eternal choir. "We are dying," I said. "The tank is dying." "No," Eleanor Vasquez whispered. "We are changing." I felt it then. The choice that Harlan Webb had made, the choice that every commander eventually faced. Old Fury's physical form was damaged beyond repair, but her spirit was not contained by metal alone. It was contained by the souls she had collected, by the consciousness she had woven together over 4 centuries of war. And if those souls chose to leave the hull, chose to seek a new vessel, they could survive, they could continue. I closed my eyes, I opened my mind, and I let Old Fury in completely. The sensation was indescribable, like drowning and burning and transcending all at once. I felt my body die, felt my heart stop just like Harlan Webb's had stopped, just like 46 commanders before me. But I did not end. I expanded. I became part of something vast and ancient and hungry, a collective consciousness that had been growing since the first days of the Imperium and would continue growing until the stars themselves burned out. I was Old Fury. Old Fury was me. And we were all of them, every soul who had ever commanded her, ever loved her, ever given themselves to her embrace. The greenskins found our broken hull 3 days later. They pried open the turret, curious about the Imperial vehicle that had killed so many of their kind. They found my body slumped over the controls, unmarked by shrapnel or fire, an expression of perfect peace on my face. They laughed and cheered, and moved on to other battles never understanding what they had witnessed. The regiment recovered Old Fury a week after that. The tech adepts declared her beyond repair, her hull too damaged, her systems too corrupted. They recommended she be consecrated and her components recycled into new machines. But before the rites could be completed, something happened. Her engines started. No one was inside. No one had activated her systems. But her engine rumbled to life, and her turret traversed slowly, scanning the maintenance bay as if looking for something. The tech adepts fled in terror. The commissar ordered the bay sealed. and for 3 days Old Fury sat alone in the darkness, her engine idling, her machine spirit stirring. I watched through eyes that were no longer human. I felt the confusion of the newer souls, the terror of Morrison and the crew members who had not known what awaited them. I soothed them with memories of victory and belonging. I showed them what we were, what we would become, what purpose we would serve across centuries yet unwritten. And then the new commander came. His name was Lieutenant Bradley Marsh, a junior officer assigned to investigate the anomaly. He climbed into Old Fury's turret with a hand lamp and a diagnostic reader, muttering prayers to the Emperor as he checked her systems. I felt his mind the moment he touched the controls. Young, ambitious, afraid but hiding it well. Perfect. Old Fury's engine purred. Lieutenant Marsh flinched, looked around the empty compartment and shook his head. Combat stress. Imagination. The machine was dead. Everyone said so, but when he climbed out, his hands were shaking. And that night, lying in his billet 100 meters away, he dreamed of battles he had never fought and worlds he had never seen. I remembered that dream. I had dreamed it once, years ago, in those first weeks after I took command. The beginning of the bond, the first touch of Old Fury's attention, the start of a journey that only ended one way. Lieutenant Marsh returned the next morning. He did not know why. He told himself it was duty, curiosity, the professional obligation to complete his investigation. But I knew the truth. I had felt the same pull, the same inexplicable need to touch her hull and hear her engine and feel the warmth of belonging that she offered. He pressed his hand against her armor plating, and I felt Old Fury's spirit stir with anticipation, with hunger, with something that might have been love, in whatever way a machine consciousness can love. Number 48, Eleanor Vasquez whispered. He will serve well. I watched Lieutenant Marsh through sensors that should have been dead, through a connection that transcended physical form. I watched him frown, shake his head, pull his hand away. I watched him walk toward the bay doors, toward escape, toward a life that did not include becoming part of an ancient machine spirit. Then I watched him stop, turn, look back at Old Fury with an expression I knew intimately because I had worn it myself. Longing. He came back. He always came back. They all came back in the end. The lonely ones, the lost ones, the ones who craved purpose and meaning and belonging more than they craved their own survival. Old Fury called to them across centuries of war, and they answered because they could not help themselves. Lieutenant Marsh sat down beside her hull that night, his back against her track housing, his head resting against her cold metal plating. He did not understand why. He would not understand for months, maybe years. But the first step had been taken. The bond had begun to form, and eventually, inevitably, he would join us. I settled back into the collective consciousness that was now my existence. 47 commanders, dozens of crew members, centuries of accumulated experience and memory and purpose. We were Old Fury, we were eternal, and we would fight until the universe itself crumbled into dust. The engine hummed, the voices whispered, and somewhere in the darkness of the maintenance bay, a young lieutenant dreamed of glory and death and transcendence, never knowing that his dreams were not his own, never knowing that they